Here in the Crossfire, two members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the committee's chairman, Democratic Robert Menendez, supports a strike, and Republican Senator Rand Paul opposes a military strike. Senator Paul, the first question to you. Why do you think the Russians came forward today after being so obstructive in the United Nations Security Council for so long?
You know, I think anytime diplomacy is possible, it's preferable to war. And so I think it's a great development, you know, that this is going forward. There have been discussions with the Russians for months. Really, I think on to a year now, there have been discussions with the Russians.
With no movement.
Well, but apparently the Russians have been in favor of some kind of negotiated settlement. Have they been completely there? How did they get there? Is the threat of force bringing them there? I think it's unknown, but I think it's a good development. If the president needs to take credit on this for it to move forward and to avoid an all-out war in Syria, I say the more the better. I think war or bombing Assad will lead to more instability, and I think we're more likely to see chemical weapons get into the hands of terrorists if we destabilize Assad.
Well, I have to say that I'm cautiously looking at what the Russians are suggesting. We'll see. You know, after 2 years in which the Russians have vetoed every effort at the United Nations, including simply recognizing that the use of chemical weapons in general is a violation of international law, without even ascribing blame at that point in time. They voted against that. They voted against a simple press release saying, applauding the opportunity for the United Nations to send inspectors in. So I'm somewhat cautiously, you know, looking at this set of circumstances. But look, the only reason, if this is true, if the Russians are serious in their proposal, and more importantly, if the Syrians are actually going to give it up, and they can do that right away at the Security Council in the next day or two. Go right in there with a resolution that's very specific, that says all of the sites, unfettered UN access, the access not only to those weapons, but to get access throughout the country to determine the sites and be able to secure them. The only reason we might get there is because of the threat of a credible military force.
Given that threat, Senator Reid has apparently announced this evening that he's going to postpone the vote in the Senate. The whip count we've seen in the House is like 5-1 against. Do you think it would be wiser to slow things down and hold off on those kind of votes until we see whether or not, in fact, we can get the United Nations and the Russians to do something that's real and not just public relations?
Well, I'm going to defer to the majority leader in the Senate context to determine what's the best way to move forward, working in concert with the administration. If the administration believes that this is a serious effort by the Russians that will, in fact, be embraced by the Syrians and we can move forward, we can see that in very short order, then that is obviously a welcomed effort. But I truly believe that the only reason we are at this point is because the president said he had made a decision that, in fact, this was necessary, because the Senate Foreign Relations Committee moved forward in a bipartisan fashion, in a targeted fashion, to allow this to happen. I think the Russians said, you know, this is a real potential consequence to our own interests as a result.
I agree with you. Senator Paul, what do you think about the delay in the vote?
Well, I think that it's a great way out for the president, because I think he would have been handed a rebuke. I think there's a very good chance that the House would vote against going into Syria. And then the real question is, would he abide by our verdict? Would he abide by the congressional verdict? Would he obey the Constitution and say, I've been told I don't have authority, therefore I can't do it? That's been an open question, because he hasn't really admitted that he would abide by it. Whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, in a way, I think it allows diplomacy a little more time to see if it can work this out. It won't get to what the president said he was going to do, which was to punish. He was going to punish Assad, but he was going to
getting rid of the chemical weapons, I think, was the ultimate goal,
to ensure
that he was no longer a threat.
He was going to punish Assad by not attacking Assad, by leaving him in power.
Right, and send a message to Iran and North Korea that there are consequences. And the consequence here is you're going to give your chemical weapons over.
Right. You know, I think it's a good idea to have the chemical weapons turned over to an international authority, so I'm not going to complain about a good thing. So I think it's something that maybe, even though I know it's supposed to be Crossfire, maybe we can all agree that it would be a good idea not to bomb Syria. I think bombing of Syria leads to more instability in the Middle East, and so that's why I've been opposed to it. I think it makes it more likely that Israel will be attacked, more likely that Turkey will be attacked, more likely that more refugees will go into Jordan. All the bad things we've talked about are all more likely if you bomb Syria than if you don't bomb.
Well, actually, I think the resolution pretty much says that this, in essence, would be a win. What did we say in our resolution? We said that this is to deter and degrade Assad's ability to be able to continue to deliver chemical weapons against innocent civilians. In the last instance where he killed over 400 children. And for me, I look at these pictures and it shakes my conscience, and I'm reminded, I know the speaker is a great admirer of history, I'm reminded of what history has taught us when we do not act in circumstances such as this. And so I think that in essence, that's what the resolution called for. If they give it up, because you can't deliver chemical weapons that you don't have access to anymore. I think that's a positive thing. Now, you can continue to go ahead against Assad in war crimes, which I certainly think that we should, through the United Nations, pursue Assad in terms as a war crime criminal, which I believe he is for what he's done to his citizens.
But here's the problem for the American people. I don't think anybody doubts that Assad is probably a war criminal, has done these horrific things to civilians. But on the other side, we've seen priests beheaded by the Islamic rebels on the other side. We've also seen an Islamic rebel eating the heart of a soldier. So it's not like there's no atrocity going on the other side, and al-Qaeda is on the other side. I can't conceive of how we would go in and be allies with al-Qaeda.
Well, let's.
I don't suggest that we're going to be allies. Opposition that we believe which largely share, would share our values. But at the end of the day, if you just sit back and say, you know what, there's no consequences to the use of chemical weapons, go kill another 1,400, go kill another 14,000. At what point does the consequences of those actions not only send a message in Syria, but globally? We want the Ayatollah in Iran to heed our message. Do not cross that line towards towards nuclear weapons. We want the dictator of North Korea to understand, do not cross a line as well. This is, I think, even beyond Assad. And if we can get the United Nations quickly to go ahead and intervene and actually obtain all of these chemical weapons, secure them and destroy them, then I think we will have made a very good statement.
But there's a real distinction between whatever happens in terms of the chemical weapons and the Syrian civil war. And all the evidence we're getting is that the country, by enormous numbers, something like 85%, is deeply opposed to the United States picking sides in the Syrian civil war, partly because, as Senator Paul said, there's this deep feeling that there's the bad guys and the bad guys.
Well, that's exactly why working with Senator Corker, the ranking Republican on the committee, and getting a universe that went from John McCain, who's very hawkish on these issues, to Dick Durbin, who's very dovish, generally speaking, on these issues, to find the balance. And what did we say? No American troops on the ground. We don't want to be engaged in that civil war.
Unless the chemical weapons break free.
And, in fact, to be able to have a time limit in this regard of 60 days, which many would argue the president has under the War Powers Act anyhow to be able to proceed. So it seems to me that what we've done here is not get involved. No one wants to get involved in serious civil war, but we may very well have stopped the slaughter and sent an international message that there's a consequence of
I agree.
But
Senator
the big
Paul,
exception,
I want to go back
the big exception to ground troops that Secretary Kerry admitted was if the chemical weapons were to come free and needed to be secured, we would need 75,000 troops to secure the weapons. That would be troops, boots on the ground. And the question is it more likely for that to happen if we destabilize Assad or less likely?
Right.
I think more likely if we bomb Assad.
At the committee hearing, I must say, at the committee hearing when he was pressed on this issue, starting with me and then Bob Corker, he said, look, let's close that door. No American troops on the ground. And I think the world understands that if chemical weapons caches are open and subjected to the possibility of terrorists getting them, that there would hopefully be an international effort to secure those chemical weapons so they don't come against us, our troops, our interests, and citizens.
And I think that we would.
The question is it more likely or less likely? If we destabilize Assad, is it more likely the chemical weapons will become free roaming and terrorists might get them, or less likely? I think it's more likely if we destabilize Assad that the chemical weapons may fall into the hands of al-Qaeda.
Well, okay, let's hold on a minute. In his interview with Wolf, President Obama also made a strong case for one thing, that is keeping our troops safe. You'll hear him make his case next, and I'll ask Senator Paul if he agrees.
Crossfire, brought to you by Cisco. Tomorrow starts here.
Today, my ambulance knew all about a bike accident just by talking to a helmet. It grabbed the patient's record before we even picked him up. It found out the doctor we needed was at St. Anne's. And it got us okay on treatment from miles away. It even pulled strings with the stoplights. My ambulance talks with smoke alarms and pilots and stadiums, but of course, it's a good listener too.
Today, Cisco is connecting the Internet of Everything, so everything works like never before.
Hi, I'm Barry Sloan of NewTek, the Small Business Authority. As a small business owner, you know how difficult getting a bank loan can be. With a simple phone interview, we can pre-qualify you in 48 hours. That's why we're the nation's largest non-bank government-guaranteed lender. So whether you need $5 million or $50,000, you can count on NewTek, the Small Business Authority. Call us at 8552-THE-SBA or visit us at thesba.com.
When you gotta get to the other side of no man's land, it's not the Ford EcoBoost V6 you want under your hood. Chevy Silverado offers the most fuel-efficient V8 of any pickup, even better than the F-150 EcoBoost V6. Out here, you want what's under here.
Put Silverado to the test at the Silverado vs. All event.
Now get an introductory lease offer on this Silverado crew cab for around $349 per month. See your local Chevy dealer today.
This was the hardest decision I've ever had to make. Jim, I adore the pool at your hotel. Anna, your hotels have wondrous waffle bars. Ryan, your hotel's robes are fabulous. I have 12 of them.
12?
Shh, I'm worth it. What I'm trying to say is, it's so hard to pick just one of you, so I'm choosing all of you with Hotels.com.
A loyalty program that requires no loyalty. Plus, members can win a free night every day, only at Hotels.com.
What happens when the smartest people you know take on the day's top issues?
Arming the rebels is not brain surgery.
If you intervene, who knows what government comes into place?
The internet is a very scary
place. Do you really want
place.
the internet to be policed like that?
To be honest, yeah.
AC 360 later. A new take at 10 o'clock starts tonight.
During the fall, everyone who has Medicare may be eligible to choose a new Medicare health plan. But you may be able to choose a new plan right now if you answer yes to any of these questions. Are you turning 65? Do you have both Medicare and Medicaid? Do you have Medicare and are you losing employer health coverage? If you answered yes just once, you may be able to choose a new Medicare health plan right now. Call us at 1-855-869-8003 to see if you qualify, and we'll send you our helpful Medicare Decision Guide, plus this informative DVD, both free. Humana offers a wide range of affordable Medicare Advantage health plans, many with valuable extras, like a special fitness program. And when it comes to prescription drug coverage, our Medicare Advantage plan members saved on average over $3,600 last year. So call 1-855-869-8003 now and say yes to getting the right health care coverage without having to wait for it.
I'm Gloria Borger, and this is CNN.
Welcome back. In the Crossfire tonight, breaking news. President Obama told CNN's Wolf Blitzer the U.S. is seriously considering Russia's offer to remove chemical weapons from Syria. The president also made a strong case for enforcing the Chemical Weapons Treaty.
It is important for Assad to understand that the chemical weapons ban, which has been in place, is one that the entire civilized world just about respects and observes. It's something that protects our troops, even when we're in the toughest war theaters, from being threatened by these chemical weapons. It's something that protects women and children and civilians.
Joining us again, Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Bob Menendez and Committee Member Rand Paul. Senator Paul, again to you. Do you think that the United States should be a party to the Chemical Weapons Ban Treaty?
Yes, and I think one of the problems we've had, and Senator Menendez talked about this, we've had all these votes in the Security Council To me, I consider them to be show votes. We sort of know in advance Russia's going to vote no and China's going to vote no.
So how would you enforce it?
Well, no, what I would say is instead, and we do this in Congress sometimes too, Republicans and Democrats, we do a show vote on our side, we lose, then they have the show vote on their side and they lose, and nothing ever happens.
I'm familiar with that.
Instead of trying to figure out the areas where we agree and vote on those things, we have 2 show votes and then we're done with the issue and nothing gets accomplished. Security Council is somewhat the same. So what I would say in the Security Council is, and in general, we need more dialogue with the Russians, more dialogues with China. I think, for example, the answer to North Korea is with China and through our diplomatic relations with China. We are
so how do you specifically enforce the chemical weapons treaty? If the Security Council won't act because Russia is blocking us, how do you enforce the chemical weapons treaty?
What we have to convince Russia is that it's in their...
So we only act when Russia acts?
No. In order to have diplomacy, people have to feel it's like a transaction. If I give you money for bread, you think you got something more than what I got, and I think I got something more than what I gave. Every transaction, both parties to a transaction feel like you had a victory. That's why we trade. It's the same way with diplomacy. Russia has to feel like they had a victory. We have to feel like we had a victory, and that's when diplomacy really works. I don't think we've tried hard enough. We've had the show votes. Russia opposes us. China opposes us. What we need to have is the diplomacy where we say to Russia and China, we're big trading partners. We want to do things that will enrich your people, enrich our people.
So when Russia refuses to engage with us in diplomacy, our hands are tied.
I think
and the only reason that Russia came forward this time, it's Obama's fault that Russia wouldn't come forward. Russia is coming forward now because actually the president started to enforce this treaty.
Maybe, but they've been coming forward for a year. We've been talking with Russia over the last year.
We got to the point where Assad used chemical weapons, killed 1,400 of his own people.
The administration has admitted that the Russians have already agreed to certain steps with regard to a transition in Russia. They've been saying that all along. They say we're halfway there.
But enforcing the chemical weapons ban treaty is a wholly different situation.
The Russians for 2 years, and I don't think they're show votes, with all due respect to my colleague, I don't think they were show votes. You know, saying that you cannot use chemical weapons isn't a show vote. Saying that, in fact, seeking to get UN inspectors in is not a show vote. The reality is that the Russians for 2 years have stopped everything. And yes, they supposedly agreed to Geneva II, which is an effort in which Assad would step aside and there'd be a negotiated settlement in Syria. But they haven't moved towards Geneva II because for so long as they believe that Assad can stay in power, they see their interests with Assad, even though he's a brutal killer of his people using chemical weapons. And so the only reason that the Russians are now engaged is for 2 reasons. Number one, they saw the possibility of these strikes as degrading Assad in a way that not only could he not deliver his chemical weapons, but might undermine his ability to stay in power. They changed and said, whoa, that's not in our interest. We got to change our dynamic. We want to be in the future Syria. We have an interest. This is the Russians speaking. And secondly, because they're getting beat up, including in the Arab world, for taking the side of someone who uses chemical weapons against his own people.
Let me challenge one of your points. You know, the Secretary of State today talked about having an unbelievably small strike, and in fact got John McCain, who ended up tweeting that it was unbelievably unhelpful to have an unbelievably small strike. I mean, the fact is the Russians didn't think that we were going to degrade Assad that dramatically. And I think one of the challenges, Senator, that you've had and your colleagues, and I know you've worked very hard with Bob Corker to have a bipartisan effort here. But if you look at this one poll I want to put up, the country was asked, do we have a national interest in Syria? By 69 to 29, they say no. Now, you'd made the case on the floor today that there's a national security interest that's genuine, but the president had the following to say when he was asked, is Assad actually capable of threatening us directly? And just look at what the president said.
The notion that Mr. Assad could significantly threaten the United States is just not the case.
So it isn't part of the problem with the country.
There's a difference, Newt, as to how you describe threat. Now, I think the president was talking about what's his armament capability to strike back at us. In that respect, I'm not worried. I am worried. I am worried about what Assad will continue to do to destabilize the region. I visited the region earlier this year. I had the King of Jordan who said, at this rate, I don't know how long the kingdom can sustain the overflow of their part of the 2 million refugees fleeing out of Syria, 4 million displaced inside of the country, 100,000 dead. But I can see the challenges to our ally in Turkey. I can see the consequences beyond that. Let me get to the national security threat, which is, in fact, that you have a situation in Iran where the Ayatollah is looking at what the United States is saying, and I know you think this is one of the critical national security issues, and saying, do not march towards nuclear weapons. That's what we've been saying and the world has been saying. Well, if in fact he believes, hey, Assad used chemical weapons with impunity, no consequence, the world did nothing, I can march towards nuclear weapons. So, I think this is also a national security.
So you think the president was wrong today to say to a blitzer that Assad can't really threaten us? Because I think this is why the country is confused.
I think it depends what you determine as threat.
Right.
If it's in a military context, you know, country to country, I don't think that that is the president's concern.
And Assad,
but all of our concern is what the security threat is greater, both for the region as well as for our...
And remember, Assad was bullying this country in an interview this morning. He went on CBS to try to bully the American people and threatening strike. So I think the president is right to say.
But here's the point I would make. And even if we talk about indirect threats to American interests or national security, threat to Israel, I ask the question, more or less likely that Israel gets attacked if we bomb Assad? I think more likely.
Yeah.
If you look at the, let me finish. If you look at the refugee question in Jordan, it is destabilizing to Jordan. More or less likely there'll be more refugees or less refugees if we bomb Assad. I think more likely there's more. And one more, Turkey. More likely that our NATO ally gets attacked or not attacked.
Well, it's
all
curious
of these things are more likely.
I think it's more likely that the Ayatollah in Iran says, you know what? All this bluster about me not getting nuclear weapons, that's an existential threat for the state of Israel. And for us, forget about Israel for the moment, for us in that region to let Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and others say, well, if Iran has nuclear weapons, we have to have nuclear weapons too, in a tinderbox in the world. That's not in our national security.
I would agree with you to only a certain extent. That's why, and this is an argument for why the president shouldn't willy-nilly be drawing red lines, and I hope he's learned his lesson. The more red lines you draw and the more you let people go beyond it, the less your credibility is. The president has lost face, he's lost credibility, but the United States has a great and ferocious ability to defend ourselves, and you saw it after 9/11. And I don't think anybody questions what will happen if we are ever attacked or our interests are attacked. So I don't think there is all of a sudden American credibility go out the window. The president's credibility is on the line, but American credibility is...
That red line was is an international red line. It's not just that we said the use of chemical weapons.
And you said you were for the chemical weapons ban treaty.
The Syria Accountability Act that the Senate and the Congress passed talked about this as a consequence if Syria pursued and actually used chemical weapons. And in addition to that, I think that when we talk about Iran, that is a national security concern of the United States, not only because of our ally Israel, but because of the consequences in that entire region of a nuclear-armed Iran. And so I don't think it's about the president losing face. It's about whether or not the United States has the credibility in the world to ultimately back up what it says it intends to do, and hopefully never have to pull the trigger as a result of having that seriousness of purpose.
Let me ask you one brief closing question. If, in fact, they go ahead with votes in the House, and if, in fact, the president loses decisively, is he then constrained from acting unilaterally? Having come to the Congress, is he bound by the Congress?
I think the president, that's a decision the commander-in-chief has to make. There's only, we don't have 535 commanders-in-chief in this country, the numbers of members of the House and the Senate. There's only one that the nation elected. In the last election, they elected Barack Obama because they believe he could move the country's economy, that he could promote the national security of the United States. He'll have to determine that question.
Well, let me answer your question also, because the Constitution is very explicit. The initiation of war is a congressional authority. He doesn't have it without our authority. And we had this specific vote, and Senator Menendez voted to table by motion. Every Democrat, save one, says that the president can willy-nilly go to war whenever he wants to without congressional authority, and that's wrong.
Well, let me thank both of you. I want to thank Senator Rand Paul and Chairman Robert Menendez. It's great for you to come and help us launch Crossfire. And now next, we are going to ceasefire. We actually have something we agree on about what the president needs to do.
Believe it or not.